Hello, my name is Nicholas Stone. I'm a second year studying computer science and psychology, and I decided to write my paper on transhumanism. Transhumanism is a topic that particularly interests me because it's very interesting to think about what kind of line can be drawn in terms of how much technology helps us, and then, on the other side, when it begins to hurt us because it begins to infringe upon how we function as humans. When writing this paper, I initially distinctly held the belief that transhumanism, just by the nature of its definition, seems pretty necessary. And I don't know why people would even be against it, honestly. You know, per my paper's, distinct contribution to the subject, I said that transhumanism is necessary, um, and that it should only be imposed upon if we are aware that um, we know once a technology transitions from being something that helps us to being something that replaces us. And I still totally agree with that. Overall, I think that I am still very clear in what I believe in. However, uh, addressing different perspectives has brought a nuance to the subject, which I think was pretty fascinating. Um, the biggest arguments against transhumanism that I've observed were that um, transhumanism seems a bit like flowery language as a means to really try to replace the human experience. Um, in many cases of different papers that I was reading, people were talking about how the very essence of wanting to indulge uh, our lives with uh, technological substitutions for things that should be common in life very much inherently just question whether or not we are attempting to say that humans are a work in progress, that humans are the next step of evolution is that of technology, and that our final form is not necessarily that of humans, but that of the machine. I thought that was incredibly fascinating because, you know, my initial thought with transhumanism was simply the fact that technology should be used to bolster us. You know, we see, I mentioned natural language processing in my paper, other examples such as gene editing, um, as well as, um, I guess, real time translation and self driving, for instance, are all things that are meant to help um, prioritize the safety of a person and kind of get rid of the inconveniences that come with any of the variability that we find in our current day-to-day processes. However, the ulterior or the opposite side arguing, saying that by attempting to fix these means that we are in itself kind of tampering with that of evolution is a pretty fascinating perspective. And I think that that's blown a little bit out of proportion, obviously, because it seems that the opposite side of the argument tends to uh, extrapolate or catastrophize a lot of these situations, when in essence, a lot of the papers that I read that were for transhumanism were really just talking about the optimization of human health and wellness and intelligence, not necessarily, of course, their inherent intentions to want to make everyone some sort of cyborg. Um, but the point still stands that, yes, in some cases, once it becomes scaled up enough, I feel like that is a very valuable concern to have. Um, the other thing is that I really do believe that um, understanding, kind of the mix between these two, this divisive perspective on transhumanism, really helps inform us um, of ways that we should be noticing how we are utilizing these technologies. When it comes to ChatGPT, I've said it in my AI agents. I've said these points in my former videos, but if we don't understand that we are relying too much on them rather than utilizing them for our benefit, then we do cross that line. And it starting now, when we're in this age, this computational age, this revolution, when we could be developing new ways to kind of streamline the human process, and that's a dangerous thing, we should be observing and being careful about how we can put those restrictions in place so that we don't create something that is so necessary to us that it begins to engulf us. I think that my original intentions, my original thoughts going into this paper have not necessarily changed from a bird's eye view. But if you look down into the details, looking at the nuances of both sides, it really helps me understand that very valid concerns happen with the scaling up of technology, and how quickly it can become so reliant and dependent on our in our day-to-day lives, which is not a bad thing, but it can become a bad thing once it begins to take place of the necessary things that quote unquote make us human. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of your day.